And by the way, if the destruction of tradition and the old order, right, the old ideas, old customs, old culture, old habits, if that seems hauntingly familiar to you, there's a reason. And that's what we're going to be talking about now in our special Will the Real Vatican II Please Stand Up? Welcome to No Nonsense Catholic. I'm your host, Matthew Arnold, and the confusion stops here. Welcome back to No Nonsense Catholic, your home for Keep It Simple Catholicism here on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I'm your host, Matthew Arnold. And we were talking right before the break about a Twitter attack on Cracker Barrel for the crime of, quote-unquote, feeling racist. And I mentioned Chairman Mao and his attack on the four olds, because he wanted to get rid of everything in his society that represented old ideas, old customs, old cultures, or old habits from before the revolution. And he wanted to get rid of these things because he knew as long as they were there, people would be tempted to return to the old order, to long for the days before everything changed. So all those reminders had to be erased, had to be stamped out. And that's why this little debate over Cracker Barrel is important, because, as I said right before the break, there's an organized attempt on the part of the radical left to bring down all the statues, rewrite history, restructure American society along the lines of this Marxist utopia, including the irrational dictates of, the whole magic rainbow alphabet soup of sexual deviance. That's, part and parcel of the Black Lives Matter ideology. And if you don't believe me, don't take my word for it. Go to the Black Lives Matter website and read it for yourself. They make no bones about it. See, the wholesome aspect of the four olds are the best defense against cultural revolution. And by the way, if the destruction of tradition and the old order, right, the old ideas, old customs, old culture, old habits, if that seems hauntingly familiar to you, there's a reason. And that's what we're going to be talking about now in our special Will the Real Vatican II Please Stand Up segment, Black Lives Matter and the Spirit of Vatican II. Mao outlawed the four olds, ideas, customs, culture, and habits in order to rewrite history and restructure his society. He had this in common with all the revolutionaries. The Nazis and communists in the 20th century, the French revolutionaries in the 18th century, the Protestant reformers of the 16th century. All were intent on erasing the old order of things, destroying monuments, erasing memories, re-education, rewriting history. Of all people, Catholics should be familiar with this behavior, because that's precisely the way the Second Vatican Council, the Vatican II revolution, was implemented in the Church. And we're going to look at all sides of this question. I'm 60 years old. And people my age and older who were raised Catholic, I was not, I'm an adult convert, but people my age and older who were raised Catholic can tell you what it was like. Every aspect of Catholic life was thrown into upheaval after 1965. And I'm thinking, first of all, about the so-called renovation of church buildings. Just like the Black Lives Matter protesters and the left-wing politicians that enable them, they're calling for the removal of statues and monuments. Well, in the spirit of Vatican II, people insisted on the same thing, removing statues from the churches. And that's not all. Because I've heard stories, and in some cases even seen photographs of beautiful statues, beautiful marble altars being destroyed with sledgehammers, and paid for by parishioners, and then thrown into dumpsters. Or in one case, I remember a marble altar was broken up and used as the parking blocks, right? The normally a block of concrete at the end of a parking space in a parking lot. They used the marble from the old altar in the parking lot. Holy altars where Christ came down, became present in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, in the Blessed Sacrament. And they weren't just, beyond that, they were also beautiful and precious works of art. Those altars, often made by skilled craftsmen, hand-hewn, hand-carved from marble, and made abroad by people that have been doing it for generations, and then brought to the United States at great expense by ordinary parishioners saving up their pennies, working people, poor people, who had to make real sacrifices in order to raise the money to build a beautiful church for the glory and honor of God, because that's what was important in their lives. Only to then see them destroyed and discarded like so much trash by the church. Now, people who lamented their destruction, or God forbid, complained, were demonized, vilified, marginalized. You're unfaithful. You're disobedience. You're going against the Pope. And this has to happen. This has to happen to make way for the restoration of the table altar, so necessary for preparing the sacred banquet, the sacred meal. Okay, this is a both-and situation. Yes, the Mass is a sacrifice primarily, and also a sacred banquet. But replacing altars with tables, or table altars, is exactly what the Protestants did, precisely to destroy belief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And it worked. And the same happened with the magnificent stained glass windows and the statues. But it's not just that. Stations of the Cross taken down, shag carpet installed over marble floors, beautiful murals whitewashed, etc., etc. I expect that you can add to this list. But it's not just art and architecture that had to be destroyed, but music, catechesis, history, private devotions, public devotions, the liturgy itself, vilified and replaced with a new order, or nothing at all. The sacrificial nature of the Mass downplayed to the point that a majority of Catholics today do not know that the Mass is a true sacrifice or that Christ is really present in the Holy Eucharist. All the treasures, the whole support structure of the Church abandoned, and the attempt made, at least, for the memory of it to be erased. Now, I remember talking to a certain priest, not long after my conversion, a couple of years in, and I quoted something to him, and as I recall, it was from Faith of Our Fathers. And he asked, well, where's that from? I said, well, Faith of Our Fathers by James Cardinal Gibbons. And he looked me in the eye, clutched his pearls, and said, oh, no, you must never read anything written before Vatican II. And he was serious. I thought he was joking, and I kind of chuckled. And I said, well, Father, does that include the Bible? Because the last time I checked, the Bible was written before Vatican II. But he was dead serious. And like all liberals, he looked at me like I had three heads, or like I was speaking Chinese, as though he just couldn't process the words coming out of my mouth. He had that expression like a dog looking at a ceiling fan, But why did the whole tradition of the Church have to go down the Orwellian memory hole? And the answer is because it's necessary to erase the past in order to usher in the new springtime of the Church, right? In other words, because Vatican II. And what a springtime, right? I mean, before the council, we had a mere 75% of Catholics going to church every Sunday. And now, 55 years after Vatican II, 50 years of the renewal of the liturgy, and that number's all the way up to 22%. The vast majority of Catholics never bother to darken the door of a church. And by the way, 22%, we're kicking butt. That's more than twice as many people that go to Mass as in most European countries. I mean, twice the percentage. And most of the hierarchy either continues to repeat the new springtime narrative, right? Oh no, things were much worse before the revolution, comrade, right? Or you've got the few conservatives that wring their hands and say, golly, who could possibly have seen this coming? We're also so shocked and dismayed that we didn't get the new springtime that we were promised. But was it really a surprise? I consider the October Revolution of 1917, right? The Bolsheviks, and we call them Bolsheviks, they call themselves the Social Democratic Party, all right? After they executed the Romanovs, the royal family of Russia, they got involved with a civil war almost immediately with the Red Army of Vladimir Lenin. And then you've got, that goes on for a number of years. And finally, the Reds were victorious. And in 1923, the social democracy becomes the Communist Soviet Union. Consider the election as Chancellor of Germany of the famous socialist and environmentalist and vegetarian Adolf Hitler, who, by the way, defunded the police. Yeah, he defunded the police and he replaced them with locally organized community groups called the Brown Shirts. And how did that end? Well, it ended with him proclaiming himself the supreme dictator of a new 1,000-year Reich. How about the French Revolution? Liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? Liberty, equality, and brotherhood. The great foundation of democracy. Okay, well, after the Reign of Terror that saw the destruction of statues and monuments, again, and the execution of the French royal family and the wholesale slaughter of Catholic priests and nuns and anybody who ran afoul of the revolution and what their needs and wants were that particular week, a little fellow named Napoleon rose to power on the slogan, La révolution, c'est moi. I am the revolution. But how did that end? It ended with him proclaiming himself emperor. And lest we forget, the church reform movement of Martin Luther started with him nailing up his